I recently discovered that there's an IndyCar driver called Stingray Robb, and I thought that's such an absurdly crazy name. Apparently, his family named him after the Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, and now he's driving an IndyCar for a Chevrolet-powered team. So he certainly lives up to his name, even though his name is, let's be honest, really stupid. I mean, why would you name your kid Stingray? If you're watching this video and you're a soon-to-be parent, please don't give your kid a stupid name, because they're the one who has to live with that name, not you. So don't call your kid something like Stingray. It's just silly. But what are some of the funniest names that racing drivers have had? Not all of these names will be like those intentionally stupid names that certain parents like to give their kids. But they are all pretty funny names regardless. One series that has a lot of drivers with odd names is the V8 Supercar Championship. Well, even the name of the championship itself is funny. It's actually just called the Supercars Championship, but if I say that, all my non-Australian viewers will think I'm talking about supercars as in, like, you know, actual supercars, Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all that sort of stuff. The V8 Supercars Championship is actually Australia's main touring car championship, so I call it by its older name, the V8 Supercars Championship, just to give it a bit of distinction from, you know, Lambos, to make things less confusing. So the name of the championship is already a bit silly, but there's also some pretty funny driver names, and I'll start out with one that's just a little bit odd. Jaden Ojeda. It just sounds funny, that's all. I mean, it's the same thing twice, sort of. It's definitely not the craziest name a V8 Supercar driver has had, but it's a little funny. One that's a bit funnier, though, is Mark Winterbottom. Now, I'm sure a few people have let out a few giggles at hearing that name, but Mark Winterbottom is actually one of Australia's most successful and famous touring car drivers. They call him Frosty as a nickname, and he won the 2015 V8 Supercars Championship, driving for Ford ProDrive Racing. He entered his first V8 Supercar race in 2003, and was still racing as a part-timer in 2025 after his 2024 retirement from competition. But in his time, he had a rather strong competition from the appropriately named Jamie Whincup, who certainly won many cups. 7 championship titles have his name on them, and he won nearly 3 times as many races overall as Peter Brock, but fewer Bathurst 1000s. Whincup has driven for both Holden and Ford in his career, but there's one driver in the history of Australian touring car racing who's famous for being Ford's longest-serving driver, Dick Johnson. He was a driver back when the Australian Touring Car Championship was named after the fact that it's a touring car championship in Australia, and not pretending that it has supercars, but the name Dick Johnson is certainly a wild one. I mean, the man was literally called Penis Penis, but he was an incredible driver. In the 1980s, the big rivalry in Australian touring cars was between Dick Johnson and Peter Brock. But it's not just Australian touring car racing that has crazy driver names. In the British Touring Car Championship, there was a driver named Daniel Rowbottom, which is kind of funny, but it's nowhere near as funny as the fact that there was also a driver in the British Touring Car Championship named Jack Goff. And it gets even funnier because he drove for a team which was called Team Hard. I mean, his name sounds like something Bart Simpson would come up with. And it's not the only name in motorsport that sounds like Bart Simpson came up with it when calling Mo. Until very recently, the team principal of Aston Martin was called Mike Crack. Many people who worked alongside him described him as friendly and with an in-depth understanding of the team, with one employee saying, "Mike Crack is warm and deep." And any prospective sponsors of Aston Martin were always reminded that Mike Crack is open for business. However, I think Mike Crack should have worked in the LNG industry, so we could then say that Mike Crack provides gas. But in F1, it's not just a team principal, there's some drivers with some really weird names too. Max Verstappen seems to have a normal name, but his middle name is Emilian, making him Max Emilian Verstappen. Not Maximilian, Max Emilian. 2 words. That's weird, but they get weirder than that. Charles Leclerc is another driver whose name sounds very normal, except for the fact that France's top main battle tank is called the Charles Leclerc as well. It'd be like if a German driver was being called Leopard 2. Well, he's Monegasque, but let's be real here. Monaco is just southern France for people who like tax evasion. They're just pretending they're a country for legal reasons. But Charles Leclerc's former teammate also had a crazy name, because Carlos Sainz is not his full name. That's an abbreviation. Carlos Sainz's actual full name is Carlos Sainz Vázquez de Castro se enamoró con Rebolo Verto Moreno de Aranda d'un Per... How the fuck do you pronounce that? Perez del Pulgar. I bet they give him a really long driver's license so his name can fit on it. Imagine if they wrote his full name on the side of the cockpit and didn't just do the abbreviation of Carlos Sainz. Also, there's the fact that he's named after his dad, who is arguably the more famous member of the Sainz family, although both are very great drivers. But unfortunately, I can't find Carlos Sainz's full name beyond Carlos Sainz Senamor. I'm not sure if it's his actual full name is just that, or if it is like the semi-abbreviated Carlos Sainz Vázquez de Castro variant of Sainz Jr.'s name. But he's not the only driver with an absurdly long name who's been on a Formula 1 grid, though. The other guy I'm thinking of drove a long time ago. His name is shortened to Wolfgang von Trips. You may have heard of him, but that's just a little fraction of his name. And luckily I'll pronounce this one better since it's easy in a language I can actually speak. His full name is Wolfgang Alexander Albert Eduard Maximilian Reichsgraf Berger von Trips. There was also a very wacky driver name in the 1930s Grand Prix racing, going back many years now, predecessor to Formula 1. There was a 1930s Grand Prix driver called Dick Seaman. Dick Seaman was a Brit, but he drove for Mercedes and expressed sympathies to Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler, so certainly he was not a great guy, and he lived up to his first name, but he did have a funny name. There's also someone who hasn't started an F1 race, but has tested in F1 and drives in Formula 2, Ritomo Miata. Ritomo Miata's father loved the Fiat Ritmo, so much that he named his son after it, and the closest thing he could get to Ritmo with Japanese characters was Ritomo, and his last name is Miata, spelt differently, but it's the same as the nickname to the Mazda MX-5. Okay, that one wasn't deliberate, but still, the guy's name is just two cars, so very odd name, but he ended up winning the Japanese Super Formula Championship and Super GT in the same year. Pretty cool. But he has struggled in Formula 2. But one of the craziest F1 drivers' names I can think of are the famous last name brothers, first name last name and first name last name, who both made an appearance in the 2018 Australian Grand Prix, both as teammates in the team TLA. Truly an incredible pair of brothers. But Formula 1 is not the source of the absolute craziest names in the world of motorsport. To find the craziest names in motorsport, you have to look at a country in North America called the United States of America. It's between Canada and Mexico, and it has a bit of racing going on there. Their most famous championships are called IndyCar and NASCAR. I'm assuming they need car in the name so they don't forget what they're racing and accidentally show up riding a cow or something. IndyCar, the smarter choice of American racing series, has some very strange names. There was Scott Speed, who also drove in F1 but wasn't very good. He never lived up to his name in Formula 1, but he has been a staple of American motorsport for a very long time, and he has been very successful over there. But he wasn't the only racing driver in IndyCar with a name of this particular genre. There was also the Australian driver, Will Power, but IndyCar names tend to be a little bit more tame than its hillbilly cousin of a racing series, NASCAR. NASCAR drivers, having families who are perhaps just a little closer to each other than regular families, tend to get all sorts of crazy names. There's Bubba Wallace, who seems to be named after Bill Clinton, but he's got one of the more tame names compared to the others you find in NASCAR. There's Dick Passwater, Dick Trickle, and Worth McMillions. But it's not just the drivers who have funny names, it's the racers too. Because in America, they commercialise everything. Now, sponsors' names in the race name are not uniquely American. In Formula 1, there was the Formula 1 Qatar Airways Gran Premio del Made in Italy del Emilia Romagna, but in regular speech you just say Imola or the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. You wouldn't say the whole thing. But in NASCAR, they actually do. In regular speech, you would still use the sponsor's name in the race name. And they don't even include the track name or location in most race names. So they don't say Daytona 500 anymore. They'll say Coca-Cola 500. And it's not just the commentators. But I've seen NASCAR fans call it the Coke 500. Then they also had the SpongeBob SquarePants 400, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 400, Hell of a Good Sour Cream Dips at the Glen, Pork the Other White Meat 400, Batman Begins 400, and the Die Hard 500. Even in V8 Supercars, where they do a bit of this, oh quick, let's name the sponsors crap, the commentators might say Repco Bathurst 1000, but the drivers, the fans, and the team staff will always just call it Bathurst, or the Bathurst 1000. But these are some of the funniest names in motorsport, whether they're driver names, race names, or series names in the case of the Supercars. There's definitely a lot of weirdly named things. But what weird names have you seen in motorsports? Write in the comments.